about this crystal nothingness being linguistic abstraction in the form of comprehension. I will take you to it. But getting back to that fire, in regard to being an artist, I find it very interesting because I still do not know how to respond to it. Because as an artist, constituting a work, I understood that my practices are wild insofar as I am within them. So it doesn't matter what to be an artist is, but rather what I do through this. Here, this narrative matters because as doing a film for the first time, I'm interested in this linguistic process of becoming image through a visual space of time, thousands of words, and above them, an unspoken intention. This intention is the same as when I'm holding a photographic camera or the charcoal pencil that I use to draw my minimal poems, or the clay to make some ball-shaped objects, sometimes full, sometimes empty, to understand whatever it is that they contain. I call them, these mud balls, enigmas. After molding them with my hands, they get covered with a metallic dust, which makes them feel like a shining, solid, existing thing. Enigmas, just like everything that exists. Either a specific form of space, of sound, of feeling, of matter, of time, of thought. I have a sense that I would need 4 hours of film to properly explain those mud balls, so I'm just showing them here, unpretentiously, with the desire that it's possible to capture a glimpse of this that for more than a decade I'm trying to understand too. All these charcoal images, objects, and mud. All are gestures that spring from this sort of metaphysical conception that involves everything that exists for me. I have been thinking about this for many years. About this mist that fills all the empty thickness that hovers between image, content, mimesis, and representation. After years, I understood that it is a desire to make contact with the real and not with the representation itself. The pure, real. For Jung, I think it arises from the fullness between unconscious and consciousness. The alchemical gold, the empty diamond of Buddha, the endless space outside Plato's cave. In short, there are so many names for this place. I'm always so surprised that there are thousands of names. I mean, for any one thing, there are an infinite numbers of names multiplied times every time that someone pronounces it. All as infinite, as incredibly imprecise, tragic, mistaken. This is the tragic beauty of representation. I think that language is a daughter of this. A torrential river gushing forth from this spring, running wildly to cover everything, really everything. As soon as it exists, it is covered. Artists, I think, are the people that are fascinated by this water, as also are the philosophers, the scientists, the shamans. Everything is covered and everything exists from this. When we say a word, we only lick this water on the top of the thing, and the taste that it has. is what is understood. As if meaning was a transparent layer of an invisible type of matter, something that covers the object and isolates it from any direct confrontation. Film, pellicule. This metaphysical crystalline melted nothingness that, when eventually removed from the object, would give rise to a pure, designified experience. In other words, the removal of coats of meaning that cover the object would provide a revealed and translucent experience. So within this metaphor, meaning would be an opaque film while the experience would be empty and therefore clear and firm, like that diamond. I remember waking up as a child and being completely detached to the coherence of a thing representing to be a thing. Waking up in this state happened endlessly. I remember having no connection, not even with the sound of my name when pronounced as a test inside my head. I remember opening my eyes in my room while laid and everything being detached. Having so many times lived this experience determined for me the very way of understanding things and the meaning of things. In this sense, the emptiness of things remains for me as palpable as a mountain. Over the years, the fascination or dizziness that this experience caused me ended up celebrating in me an ambiguous desire. Sometimes sought to withdraw the pellicule of meaning to see the objects in their plenitude, and sometimes superimpose them with layers of comprehension, like language does, blinding them with as many meanings I could give, and, therefore, see. And possibly, it is precisely this ambiguous desire to which I react by being an artist. Since that time in childhood, I imagined I would be a writer. When I decided to study art, it was by the accident of entering an exhibition and finding everything incredibly ugly. Absurdly ugly. And got hypnotized by the possibility of doing something absurd. When I entered art school, I quickly understood that I didn't need to know how to do things. It was actually the opposite. So by not knowing how, I started to draw. For months, every night, capturing something completely abstract in very symbolic images. Really every night. It was a blind jump inside something that it was just falling out from my hands. During the days in art school, I was interested in sculptures. To give form was enrapturing. But paradoxically, almost as a curse or destiny, the one practice where I would reach that absurd with stunning precision ended up being images. I mean those that keeps emerging in the back of the eye. I was doing drawings, sculptures in art school, and within this context, one day I did a photograph of my family talking in the kitchen. But the photograph appeared so detached to what I was experiencing, as if showing a layer beyond. It was at this moment that I got absorbed by trying to grasp what an image is. 15 years passed, and I am still. After that day, I started to do self-portraits to investigate this connection between image and existing. I did endless portraits of me and of others, until the point I decided to portrait other things with that same intention, to observe things while enacting themselves, enrolled with their meanings. The first photograph I succeeded was of a camel in a zoo, after of a fossil in a museum, and then of an image representing a stone inside an encyclopedia of minerals. The transmutation of matter into images was an endless jump, and the more I would do, the less I would be able to explain what was I doing. I started to pursue things that could represent themselves as I was representing to be me in my portraits. Becoming image, becoming time, becoming fossil. It was completely intuitive to start entering and photographing inside all kinds of museums, churches, zoos, ruins, prehistorical sites, and numerous centers of archaeology and natural history. In all of these places, I was to observe the objects in that same way, with the precise same attempt of those first portraits. I never really wanted to be a photographer, but I ended up becoming one, only because of that endless, tragic, imprecise, impossible, and never-ceasing attempt. In one of my photographic expeditions to a paleontology center, I remember holding with bare hands a fossil of an 80 million years old crocodile. Meaning of time felt ungraspable. Fossils are condensed matter, time's condensed symbol of time. I guess this is why I started making those mud balls. And why I started to enter caves to observe time melting in their dripping surfaces. The same way I was entering museums, observing culture to differ matter from meaning. I'm fascinated by this desire of molding matter to represent other matter. I mean color trying to represent the image as sounds to meaning of words, as things to other things. Again, an infinite cycle, like a growing spiral from which culture emerges in an attempt to mimic the unbearable complexity of nature. I was thinking about the mimesis, the invisible, the monster, the ruin, the myth, the ghost, the tragedy, the fossil, the theater, the eye, and the cave. For me, all those were figures of language with overlapping symbology. After a time, I didn't even try to photograph things outside an enacting context, either mythological, artistic, scientific, linguistic, or a religious state of representation. I was pursuing not images, but something I wanted to capture layering over images. It was a matter gap, an absence, a dead, melted, thick, invisible water from which I removed the objects from, always so invaded with matter, by the act of photographing them. I spent years wandering around this swamp of comprehension, of representation, of abstraction. I was looking at things, searching for their evidences. I kept trying to understand them physically, existing, but they were all covered with this dark, shining, melted substance, this unsolvable form, images presenting nothing but themselves. I spent more than a decade instinctively entering those museums, zoos, churches, ruins, and study centers. I kept trying to understand resemblance, mimesis, symbol, depiction. I knew they were covering all the objects I was looking at, and I intentionally wanted to learn how to distinguish the difference between mimesis, meaning, image, and matter. Paradoxically, I was seeking to do that by the use of photography. After so much time looking at things and trying to understand the images of things, one day I realized the problem of image actually relies in the problem of reality. The final grasp of that happened not inside museums, but by the experience of entering ancient prehistorical sites and being able to photograph the walls of real-sized replicas of two prehistorical caves, At the time of the opening of Chauvet replica, I was authorized to photograph the replica the very 2 days before its official opening to the world, together with only one or two painters doing final touches on the painted fake walls of that simulacrum. I remember spending hours by myself, looking and photographing so many details of that intricate mimetic structure. The drawings on the replica of Chauvet were unbelievably complex. But it was looking at one, red handprints at the entrance of that cave, that got my eyes to fill with tears and finally cleared one thing I was trying to solve for many years. My problem was their problem. The problem of reality, of meaning, of seeing. There was no solution, only a never-ceasing incognito. Science, religion, philosophy, art. We compare, we believe, we think, we recreate. By looking at those drawings, I understood that we don't understand reality, but we have been trying to, ever since. Looking at the complex layering of time and of meaning over the drawings and over the very forms of those caves led me to better comprehend something related to vision, which is, we cannot signify reality. Sculptures, drawings, maps, photographs, schemes, objects, writings, traces, fossils, animals representing animals, rocks, fake rocks, portraits of people, people posing to portraits, countless things, explaining, depicting, translating, resembling other things. So many distinct objects, all surfaces equally thick, all equally empty and embedded with the same myriad of meaning. I'm talking about images. After years staring at endless things and after entering those caves without ever being able to fully understand any of it, I realized that the very act of seeing is empty and abstract. Image, forming in the back of the eye, is language. To see is not evident. It is only from a linguistic experience of translation, from abstract vision to representative comprehension, that arises the images as crystallines, transparent, layers of meaning, emerging like water from the deep of this black muddy abstract, the abstract of comprehension. Depiction existing, depiction existing. Images are images are images are images. All that exists is a negative. A thing is a surreal, be real, unreal. It's all covered. Time is the only pure matter, and it melts over all that exists. Everything else is invisible. There is no bound. We cannot fully comprehend things, much less can we explain or translate things into other things, such as to words, images, sounds, and objects. It is impossible of understanding. Language is the base of tragedy. The horses of Velázquez, they shine. This is me, much after all this that I told about. Theater, collage, performance, and experiments of total artworks emerged from those learnings. But this would be dismissed to arrive to here, presenting myself, an artist inside her studio. I've had this studio for more than 2.5 years, but could never really be here. I got the keys, set this place almost as it is now. I mean, in this moment of the film. And few months after I left to Greece, where I stayed, isolated, studying alchemy, Taoism, and meditating with trees. Sounds romantic, heroic, sabbatic. But I left because I had a burnout. That fire that the philosopher told me, that fire indeed transmuted me, but burned me. I was confirmed with depression, completely exhausted of the work that had led me to this and that I entitled as the infinite history of things, or the end of the tragedy of the one. After that, the last thing I had to do before being able to leave Brazil was a solo exhibition that I titled The Ashes, the Mirror, the Reverse of Brightness and the Becoming of Fire. Amongst the images resembling war, metaphysics, ashes, and indecipherability, I hid one of a woman about to get burned. Taken a few years before in a museum in Paris, it was a photograph that I did of a wax model, molded after a scene of a film, from the face of the actress representing Joanne d'Arc when about to get burned. Funny enough, this would be the image that I would give the owner of this space to thank her for providing me it during these years of use. For this film, I borrowed the photograph back to have it here as the symbol of a woman immersed in fire out of a sense of deep purpose, of a hallucinated self-imposed life mission like I imagine it was the life of Joanne d'Arc, and maybe also mine, for reasons I'm not telling here. After the opening of the show, I couldn't bear even setting my eyes on my work. Exhausted and with a sense of having lost the directions of what before used to drive me blindly, I left to find a water that could cease this burning. And I did. I ended up in a remote region in the most southern point of the European continent. One day, through a long walk, by crossing a mountain, I reached Vathia, that after I would learn it meant deepness. I guess due to the immediate profundity of the ocean in front of that sheltered bay. There I stayed, learning quietly from the life and death of plants, from balancing stones, and from swimming for miles, always audaciously naked, protected only by the strength of my own solitude. Swimming, I wanted to discover what be in the distant areas of that bay, and it was like that, going intensely far, that one day I found a cave that had its entrance only through the sea. More than the resilience necessary to swim again to that beyond, it took me 2 days to muster the courage to go until its end. With time, the end of the cave became an intimate friend, and so I would spend long hours there, every day, sitting on one stone that would rise alone in the middle of the water. On that stone I would stay, breathing, singing, or sometimes inventing theater plays in my head, while watching the sea lick endlessly the walls of that deep. I was sighting what dwells between everything that exists. Water was sublimating me, and the silence that resides within the center of all things made me indissociable from the stones themselves. That cave slowly penetrated me until my bones, and I understood what it means to be infused with existence. I wish I could talk here more of what happened to me over those months in Greece. But I would need another hour of film, which I don't have now. So I'm just going to jump everything that transmuted me to reach the moment I accepted to be back, many months after, by the request of presenting a new exhibition in Austria. It was a white and blazing blind fire. That was the name I chose for that show. By the end of that, it was February 2020, and I decided to return to Brazil because, most of all things, Carnival was arriving. I knew I wouldn't be able to live far from nature anymore. Instead of being forgotten, my learnings needed to grow. And so I set to live in a natural reserve outside the city of São Paulo near a Taoist friend. Carnival was a blast. We didn't know, but we were saying goodbye to a way of existing together, which we did under extreme joy. Pandemic was announced 1 week after, when I was already settled in the woods, already isolated since the year before. On the last days before quarantine, two important things for this film happened. To give a form to what had happened to me in Greece, I decided to enlighten my head, my hair, as you see me now. The other thing was an invitation by a museum to do a portrait of a sculpture. A day before lockdown, I went to photograph La Petite Danseuse de 14 ans of Edgar Degas. That was kept inside a glass box, which I asked not to be removed. Using pieces of white and black fabrics, I used the reflections of that vitrine as a way to access the complex myriad of meanings of that sculpture. I didn't make one portrait, but hundreds, all extremely diverse and I guess necessary to a historical disruption that piece aimed to represent. That day was the only day I photographed that sculpture, but a stronger dance between me and Degas' bronzes would follow me along the months of isolation that the entire world would go through. La Petite Danseuse was bringing me back, straight to the heart of my research. An intensity of new comprehensions regarding image and the images of images emerged. I was molding them with new means. In rare visits in the restricted area of the museum, still during heavy lockdown, I created assemblages by mixing bronzes of Degas with small masks, the portraits that I had done of La Petite Danseuse. Photographing them felt like bringing images from the unconscious of those sculptures, as a deep mirroring to what was happening outside, or inside, or perhaps in a mist, rift, or break of that moment, emerging far from everything that was known to me. Meanwhile, in my improvised studio in the forest house, as well as in this one, color started to pour over the dense portraits of La Petite Danseuse. The stiffness of those bronzes were melting until a state of vibrancy, and suddenly, out of that, I started painting. The problem regarding image, that incognito, suddenly it left the photographic to assume a denser form where everything is infused, everything is dressed in its own performance, and everything is drunk by its own dizzying existence. And everything dances. Everything dances. By painting I realized that colors are not images but substance of meaning, transmuting as if alive over them. These first paintings, I realize now, were and still are about fire, but alchemical fire, about something that alters and exists continually under the dance between matter, non-matter, and beyond matter, so differently from the reference that photograph always involved their images with. I was pursuing to create images that would resemble to purity of matter like a solid, vibrant, existing entity of itself, painting as if on my mud balls, to observe matter incarnated in this state of a color. I'm not sure anymore if color really exists, if it manifests itself, or, like language, if it comes only from the parallel of not being another color. Color is so attached to being image, but it is not it. And it is astonishing to look at the intricate transparent density that separates them. I got absorbed with creating this transit between becoming color in itself, a state of latency that lacks another name, so I have been calling it alchemical. The thing made of fire, a spiraling vertical that even long before having a form was already dancing and changing everything until it's inverted, unfolded, absurd, and beginning back and forth, again and again. The misty image, or true image, or pure image. Regardless of the names, I am still looking for deeply invisible images. The image on top of the image of the thing. The latent that invades vision, a layer beneath seeing. The real so pure real that it remains unmaterialized, vibrating as a beyond real. The unconsciousness of image, which is as pure as incorporeal. This film was planned to end here, in the peak of this comprehension, of having color dancing dazzling over these images. It was supposed to end with me telling I'm now writing an opera with everything that I recently understood, and that this film would be a short rehearsal of what I want to do. But in the day I was writing the script for this film around 2 months ago, was the day I received a phone call from the owner of this space letting me know that due to pandemic consequences, the family would quickly need the space back. I had no idea what I would do with everything that this place holds. Due to this unexpected twist, instead of rehearsing the opera, I decided to do a film about the years that my works were here, most of the time quietly resting, dreaming, evolving their spirits, slowly inventing their forms so that they could whisper me their names during my own dreams. I had this space in a long period that I was almost never here, but immersed in fire, in water, in forests. The end of this shooting was defined to the day before I needed to leave it empty. And so that happened. And I became empty. For being able to create a film about my past in such short notice, I had to leave my futuristic ideas behind. But I didn't. There was nowhere to go, but there would always be. There was nothing I could do, but I did. From the blankness, I was back inside that water that will never cease to heal me. Back inside the fire that keeps transmuting me over and over, and back inside the forest where I went to relearn how to perceive existence. Having to leave this space in the middle of a lockdown made the blood and the voice of my work enter my body completely. Power, fire, heat, and strength. I was back inside my caves, from where I never really left. Fire, fire, beautiful fire, where the infinite of everything was just one, the junction of meaning was a circle, the void of the void was entire, and the door of the end would never close. Because the gap between everything was an egg. The emitted light was a vessel, and the absence that existed was complete. Truth would not contain the present, as past was just the sound of an unison, yes. Misunderstanding was a way of fear, and the forest was the only form of ancient. There, where any word would only know its beyond. Golden was not even an existence, since it knew, within itself, to be as endless. Where everything would be formed without a shape. The circle was always straight, and the end was nothing but the beginning. Each thing that existed was an everything. Truth not even knew its own sound. And so, everything could change. It was a bright, blazing, blind fire.
Sophia, we've just seen your video. It's really amazing to see this. We've actually, it's the product of a long relationship you already have with foam. You had a solo exhibition in Foam 3H in end of 2016, beginning of 2017. Black chalk and white charcoal, or the myth of the absent matter past. You were also selected as one of the foam talents of 2020, and your work is, as part of that group show, still on display at this moment in the museum in Amsterdam. And we also have work of yours in our collection that also was on display in 2018 in the exhibition Loading Works from the Foam Collection. So I'm incredibly happy that out of that relationship, we could also create something new with you, which is so special. So first of all, thank you for that.
No, thank you. Thank for FOM for making this possible. It's really like it's the moment. Well, first I want to thank everybody also for being here with us and having just watched the film. I would love to know, to have replies, to understand how that arrives outside of my head. And I must say that I proposed that I would burn an image of a horse, a large scale image, and we did it. And we did a short documentary about it. So it was already this thing of filming me doing experience, and now we are doing this, which was amazing, even for me, an amazing surprise, that from an idea of a live performance, the project by itself grew so much and became this short feature, or this medium film.
Because in fact, it is your first video work, right?
Yes, it's my first film, actually. It was very much a film in terms of also how it was designed, to how I developed the idea of it. So the narrative, the text, the scenes, everything was very made from out of nothing, because the project started from zero less than 5 months ago, and it was so intense, but also I learned so much out of it. So I'm really happy with what we just saw now.
Well, it is indeed, the whole idea. It started with that you have already in the past, you have organized performances, or well, I think you prefer to call them happenings, during which, in collaboration with performers, you've been creating images, basically, through performing images, but then also you documented it, and out of these happenings that are artworks in their own right, you created images that of which 2 of those are actually part of Foam Talent 2020 of the exhibition, and that's how we thought of maybe streaming one of these happenings and create one in relation to the Foam Talent exhibition and your work there. But it's really exciting how this actually developed into a different direction and has become a film. Especially what fascinated me most with seeing the film is that it really gives the viewer a peek into your brain. It's like your sketchbook, your universe. And the video focuses on your artistic practice as well as the practice of being an artist in general, I think. And one of the things that you are stating in the work is the act of seeing is empty and abstract. And also you're saying that image is a language and the linguistic experience of translation. And especially that focus on language made me think of the word imago, a word that derives from Latin, and in Dutch language, it is actually used in daily language to describe the image people have of a person, so a persona. But in biology, the imago is the last stage an insect attains during its metamorphosis. So it's also part of a process of growth and development. And well, for me, the video work seems to be a performance of that very word, imago. On the one hand, is you could see it's a self-portrait as an effort to control how history will remember you, while staging or restaging different representations of yourself. While at the same time, the work could also be considered more of a thinking exercise in which you use yourself as a model. And then, in addition to that, it's such a diaristic reflection of your artistic growth and personal transformation, which relates very well to that biological point of view on the
Yes.
so I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm bombarding you with observations, but what observation would be leading to you? How do you reflect on the things I just said?
I think it's so nice how you describe it, the many layers of what I was trying to do, because there was indeed this intention. It was very clear for me that I was trying to first the film. I understand that the film is divided in 5 acts, and the first act is the swamp. That it's this where I stayed. Maybe that is the book that you have behind you. That it's saying images do not exist. And also it's the 10 years where I was really thinking about this view, this curvature of language that covers everything that exists, including images. And images are actually this layering. And it is this layer that it is what we see. We don't really see anything. We see only language, in the terms that we only see what we understand of what we see. And these, I didn't mention that in the film, but it's nice to mention here that there was a moment in the beginning of my time in art school that I was living, sharing my house with a friend that it was losing his vision. He was becoming blind very quickly. And also I was reading a lot about neurology and relation between what is to see and what is to comprehend vision. There was a book called An Anthropologist in Mars. I don't know the right translation in English. But so at that moment, I really understood that seeing is a linguistic experience. It's not given. You don't know how to see without a sense of linguistic structure of seeing. And this defined it for me. Yes, yes.
Well, no, if you mean that if vision is a linguistic experience, do you mean that the very fact of naming things, so putting, trying to put a vision into words, would you compare that with the idea of making an image, in which, because making an image, for example, a photograph is framing something, so it's in language, we frame things with words, and would you describe that, or do you think these are different
No,
things?
what I think is that when I say what an image, the image that I'm referring to is the image in the back of the eye. It's not photographic image. It's image. It's the problem that we have, that there's something that happens inside our brain, and we understand the world. We understand what is to exist out of this thing that is happening here, and it is image. So, and when I say linguistic process, it's even deeper of separating things like, okay, so this is a frame, this is a furniture, and this is the ground. Also, it's first about being able to separate colors and density and sizes of colors, and create out of this a sense of ambience of where I am. And this is what I really learned in these books. For example, there was this surgery that happened, that emerged, that made possible that blind people that were born blind could be able to see. And it was a large group of people in the world that out of this new surgery, they were seeing for the first time. And then they were perfectly seeing, but they were just starting to see. It was a new experience. And the scientists put a ball, a square, and a triangle, like a physical ones, in front of the one person. And the person grabbed the triangle, said, this is a triangle, grabbed the square, said, this is the cube, and the sphere, and also said the sphere. And then the doctor said, close your eyes. The recent viewer closed it, and the doctor put them in different positions and said to the guy who was just seeing, now you tell me which one is the ball, which one was the square, which one is the cube. And the guy couldn't say. Without touching, he couldn't refer what he was knowing so well since he was born. He knew a sphere was a sphere and a triangle was a triangle, a pyramid, not triangle, like a 3D shape. But by looking at, he couldn't. There are many examples of this in the book. So it's this, what we see is really something that we learned to create meaning out of that. And from this is how I arrived to photography, even without knowing so much in the beginning, why I was so interested in this process of things becoming image, but it was very strong. And I couldn't leave places of representation. I was only working inside museums, study centers, zoos, scientific places that they were examining things existing. And I was examining the image coming out of this. And photography was the way that I could capture this strange thing that I saw, that I would see happening all the time. And with photography at that moment, it was the thing that most connected what I was experiencing with an image that I could deliver. Because if I did like an abstract painting, I wouldn't get to the abstraction of image that I wanted to get with images that we see in the back of the eye. So it doesn't matter if it's an image of a rabbit or if it's an image of a square. I still wanted to reach abstraction out of being able to comprehend what is that, what is to see something. So this was something that this was the reason why I kept photographing things. I don't even consider myself a photographer, and I don't think I am one. At the same time, I think I am the most rigid photographer I ever met in the term of really trying to understand what photography is. It doesn't matter, but the thing is that photography was a way to achieve this that I was trying to understand about image. And then you say imago, which is quite nice because for sure it's the root of it, the word image. And it relates to this crystallization, biological crystallization, or to, I forgot now what was the first thing that you describe it, but it's...
You mean it's the biological use? Like
the other one.
Oh, well, yeah, in Dutch, it's a common word to use for a persona. So the image that a person creates of him or herself, or at least the image that other people have of a person.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one thing nice about this is that I'm learning a lot from recent anthropology, is this conception that comes from indigenous knowledge that everything is infused with a perception of the other. So at the same time you look at things are looking at you. And at the same time you have an image of you, things also have an image of themselves, of itself. And it's also, so you are being, so images are talking all the time in between themselves. It's not me and I have all the images. And also I think this happens in my work, or when it happens in my work, it's the moment that they become my work. It's when I manage to twist something in the state that it's already this something, it's being able to manifest itself, like in manifest its own imago by its own means, like it's more of this sense, and then you lose the you lose the authority of you saying what this thing means, and you start thinking that it's impossible to know. I don't know.
I liked also how you actually you did it in the video work as well, or in your film. You're speaking about how all of your artworks, the images you have created, are in your studio, and you refer to them almost as persons in themselves, that they are there to dream and to yeah, and also what you're saying about that they have a life on their own. I think there are so many there's yeah, so many different positions of relating to images from yeah, you could say a professional point of view. So for example, I very much recognize the labor of applying meaning to images by analyzing them, rearranging them in relation to each other to make different connections. I mean, and forge different meanings. That's also what I do as an art historian and a curator. So all these roles, also, you could also think of the role of an archivist, a conservator, an archaeologist. These are all clearly connected because they're all dealing with representations and imagery, and trying to make sense by putting an order to them. And then you have the role of the artist. So how would you describe what distinguishes all these different ways of engagement with images and representation? And what distinguishes the role of the artist from these other forms of labor on the comprehension of representation? Or maybe there is no difference, in the sense that what you are describing in the video work, I really recognize things of it that are also applied to, for example, how I relate and how I'm trying to make sense, even though I'm clearly not an artist.
Yeah, because what I think it defines what things are and what they are used for is really the intention and how we deal with what things are. Because things are nothing and they are everything at the same time. What define the purpose or the practice of creating an image or of comprehending an image is the attempt. It's the way of the attempt itself. Because and this also this is how culture is structured anyway. So we create these meanings and we keep connecting it with this or this, but it's completely
well, your comprehension comes forth out of your own creation, of course.
yes.
And you're visually creating, whereas I, as an art historian, if I write about work, I'm again trying to put it into words, which yeah.
But also, I was trying to put into words. I really tried this time, and this was the most amazing thing of this film, because this that I told you in the film, I'm thinking about it for really, truly, maybe 10 or 15 years. For sure 10, maybe 15 years I've been thinking about this. But because the works, they are so hermetic, I don't know even if that's a word in English, but they are so enigmatic, or they are so dried, and they deliver something that it's so strong, then it stays as like an entity image delivering something, sometimes when I'm lucky, that I never could really show what makes me do these works, how, what get
What got you there?
what's in my head so that I get to be, and what experience I've been through that led me to do this. So it was super relieving for me to be able to tell, even if very briefly and only inside the studio, be able to tell more of the experience that I've been having so many times under so different circumstances, but by going very deeply in nature and inside caves and looking at prehistorical sites, entering ruins. I really did that like intensely for 7 years at least. I was only inside these ruins and fossils places and talking with archaeologists, with paleontologists, and go inside caves. I actually want to do a feature film out of this where I can at least share more of these images of me inside the woods, inside the caves, of the caves themselves, is because I could realize, I could understand so much by this radical enterings I did and how I live with this. But this is out of the film because this film, the idea is that it was going to have a time gap related to the moment that that studio existed. So it was after the project that I did as curator in São Paulo Biennial, that out of that I had that burnout. 2018 until now that I left the studio and came to this new one, which I'm happy to tell that I'm in a very nice new studio, that I left that one for this one.
Because that was, of course, the big question is where you would end up now. So I'm happy to have confirmed that you found yourself a good place to continue.
It's full with light and sun. It's the opposite of the cave feeling of that one. This one is like, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Seems to fit a new stage, the next stage, then new beginnings.
Yeah. If I have time, I'm only staying here for maybe 8 months because it's a big building that is going to be refurbished. But if I have time, I for sure will do. You know, I really want to do new projects. I just now need to understand how, because filming is very complex.
But what you just touched upon, what was very clear in your video work is that on the one hand, that sort of research you've been doing, but also then how that can never be considered disconnected from you as a person. Of course, for every artist, personal motivation is key, because that's why you even create things. But you could say like, oh, I'm just looking at what representation means, but it's so embedded in your personal journeys, you could say. And I was wondering from that, so because your work is very rooted in that history of representation, which basically is as old as humanity itself, like creating images is what mankind has been doing from its very beginning. And I'm also very interested in what you say in the video work about the connection between image and existing, and the idea of the becoming of an image, and especially in relation to how social media now seems to be dictating our image between image and existing. I wonder, what is your vision on society's relation to representation and image today? I mean, I have the feeling you're really reflecting on histories of representation. So up until today, do you feel you could, say something about that?
Yes, one thing that I forgot to mention in your other question, and it's a nice moment to get it back, is that this film is out of a series of performances that I started to do in 2018, called it Performance to Become a Photograph. That it was precisely that, this big performance where people were holding gigantic masks and doing things, and there was music and singing and a lot of people together, full painted with ink and earth and mud and turmeric. So and then the other types of performances also, but all of them are from this series, Performance to Become a Photograph, and this film comes out of that. And in regard to what you asked, I think what is happening to image from the time photography started, it's very interesting, very complex.
Yeah,
But
because
yes.
Well, becoming a photograph, you know, that whole idea is really interesting in the context of current trends, because I mean, I've heard that there are young women going to have plastic surgery in order to look like more like the filters we're using on social media platforms. So it's almost like people do want to become a photograph, or at least a manipulated one. So I'm also wondering, like, what does that say between, like, about our current connection between image and existing? But maybe it's quite a huge
No, I
question.
have what I feel about this is that there is a sense of commodity, of becoming a product, of consumism that is so strong now. We are so like inside this capitalist swimming pool that we didn't realize that we became commodities as well, even for us. So we, as as beings, we slowly understood ourselves as products that has this visuality and has this, and then we are, and because of the social medias being so strong, we are very related to what is this, and we are consuming our own images and images of others in this strange, I don't know, the structure that capitalism gave. And because capitalism managed to define value out of very specific things. So if something is new, it's valuable. If something is not new and it was used, it's more or less trash. And then we throw it away. And it doesn't have any of the value that it had before leaving the store. And then this value thing mixed with what things are and what we are, it's really, it's like for me, what is happening, it's like a disease of humanity. We are like losing the conception of existing and becoming really products of this consumism. So it's really, I think it's the opposite of image. It's the opposite of existence, and we need to wake up. Really need. In
So
terms
then,
of
how should one consider this film, in which it's, I guess, the first time? No, I mean, there have been self-portraits in your older work before, and that's also something you're stating in the video work, I believe. But coming from what you just said, like, how are you then reflecting on how in this film you're also creating an image of yourself, obviously very different from how people are staging their personas online, but could you say it's almost a counter reaction on that, or do you still feel inclined to create a narrative around yourself coming from a deep search, as that personal journey of yours has also been retold by you in the film?
Yeah, it's a good question, because at the end also I did this. I created an image out of myself, and we are all embedded with this sense now of creating images of what is the image of myself. But what I tried also was to balance existence of myself and existence of other things as the same. And also this sense that it's so interesting that everything has its own point of view. Also to recover more of this humanity that it's inhabited in everything. So there's the book is near me, but there is an anthropologist that made a book called Cannibalist Metaphysics, that he says about the human perspective of a tiger and the human perspective of a plant, because plants are humans inside the coherence of what to be a human is in our coherence is complex. But anyway, it's I fall in the trap of becoming image, but with the intention of making everything having this kind of sense of, I don't know, of, I don't even know.
Yeah, no, but I really see it as you having used yourself as a model to exercise the idea of becoming an image.
Yeah.
And that's was for me so fascinating about it. Also, that first when I see you appear in the film, like the first thing I thought was, hey, she's back to the old haircut. And then later on, it turns out to be a wig. So that was like, and that was such a simple gesture, but so effective in how we are self-fashioning or like changing our appearance, which is sort of playing with the idea of representation. And I think, yeah, and it also has a long history in art history. It has a long tradition. I mean, so I thought it was because it's not just a self-portrait about you. It's a portrait of you as an artist, and then yet it's also not just about who you are, but what you are or how you are in relation to images.
Yes.
So, well, it has many layers, and that is what I really love about the work.
Yeah.
um,
And one thing about this is that a friend of mine saw it and said, Sophia, but why are you dressed like Joan d'Arc in the beginning with that hair? And I said, no, I'm not dressed like Joan d'Arc. I'm dressed like myself. I used to have that hair. And she said, yes, yes.
yeah.
Because she thought I was mentioning to Joan d'Arc straight. And it's not. It's because also at the time I showed the Joan d'Arc picture, I was actually with the same hair of Joan d'Arc, but so it's this double mixing of the figure of a woman immersed in fire and out of a sense of deep purpose, as I said in the film, and myself with the same situation. I really feel, I really comprehend Joan d'Arc in her crazy, like mission sense of life. And I think I had the same. And I really didn't speak in the film about the reasons that led me to this in my life and what happened. I wish I do a film also about this one day. But it's this sense. And also the hair made possible that this 2 years and a half really happened in 5 days of filming, intense 5 days of filming for this film.
Yeah, actually, speaking of those intense 5 days of filming, do you have some backstage imagery for us so we can? Well,
Yeah.
it becomes a bit of a meta thing of because the film is already about sort of giving a glimpse of your universe. But do we have a backstage
Yeah.
of the backstage?
Yes, there is. And also, one thing that was scary for me was how much structure a film need to be a natural film. We were doing everything in my studio, and everything was very realistic. I even considered this more of a documentary because I tell everything that really happened in my life, and also it's in my studio. I didn't. It's not a scenario. And the last performance also was inside the studio with my velvet curtains from Biennial, with the pictures that I had in the studio. So it was really realistic, everything. And still, for some filmings, it needed a structure. I even have one picture here that it's, let me share my screen. Need to see. let me see if I, no, wait.
Yeah.
I found.
Oh, it was actually already happening, but just try
No,
again.
I find a better way to show it. What can you see?
Yeah.
You can see little pictures, right?
Yes.
Only that. So this is an example. This is the film where this is the thing where the moment where I filmed this scene that I put books in this table, and it was only in the table films that we use its structures. But you can see this. It's like a thing for the camera go and do this very soft traveling, but it was the only big structure that we had. All the other scenes, almost all of them were made by holding the camera. But this for me, it's really impressive of how much structure just to film something. And I was here like looking at the image and putting that stuff out of it. That's
But
more.
still, even if this is a constructed image, you have always had a table like that, or a vitrine
Yeah.
kind of table in which
No,
you.
no, it's just the table of my studio.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything in my studio, everything I filmed, it was just how my studio was. There was no, and also there's this change because in the beginning the studio is very dark and it has the joint dark image doing that, and it has the more like gray and black and white images. Because when I first set the studio, that was more or less the sense of the studio, and I call it for the team. I was calling it fossil studio. So everybody knew that the fossil studio should have more of a dark and related to like this prehistorical research cave. And then at the end, now when I went to film, we have to remove everything because the studio was filled with color and with very, very intense works and paintings. So the final film, the final images that you see in the film are the images of how my studio was when I started doing the film. Yes, and then for the last performance, we have like to kind of empty the studio. That it was good because I really left my studio on the day after the filming. It was crazy, but we empty everything to be able to do something like that. We covered everything, like a big, like 10 square meters a sphere, no. Look, here you see outside. And then everything was just velvet curtains and images. This is a painting from a friend behind it. So it's a few paintings and most of it my photographs. And here is we outside the circle of curtains.
Could you maybe reflect a little bit, maybe as a final note, on how the video work ends? So instead of just us watching, like the spectator watching you, there are all these performers together performing with, I think, masks of your face.
No,
or not?
No, not necessarily my face, but multiple masks that I collected in many years of research.
Because I think that most of like the happenings that you have, like that we just spoke about, how to become a photograph, that was the inspiration for this collaboration. Then it turned into a film, which also had to do with the pandemic, that it was difficult to organize a happening like that. Yet you did end this film with maybe a condensed version of what those happenings always looked like. Or how would you reflect on that final performance? Can you say anything about that?
The final performance was the original performance that I should just show in the film. Like what I was imagining, I wanted to do in the beginning before I got the notice that I would have to leave my studio in short notice, like in 2 months. I was just planning to do these performatic things with people. And like I was writing an opera and it was related to that. And then when I realized I was going to lose the studio, I thought that I needed to tell the story of that time that I had this studio. It was much more urgent than doing the opera practice. But the one thing, then by starting to write and think, I understood that out of that situation, my work arrived to that point where the performance happened. And it's almost as it's the opening of my work. It's to where everything arrived from the learnings that I had in the last 2.5 years as artist. So it's very intense and it's very strange because it's 2 or 3 minutes of, I think, of this final act, but it gives a sense of intensity and also of this. I think that we realized after being almost 2 years in a pandemic situation, in a lockdown, is this sense of the strength of being together and the strength of representing itself and the strength of this changing, because they are always changing masks in this. So it's more about the imago than the masks that.
Excuse me.
But it's more or less I think it's about the strength that we are arriving out of the situation of lockdown. And the entire film, it's only me inside my studio. So it's very strange. It's very it was very intense to do this scene. And everything had to be super tested. It was so incredible to be able to do this, but we were so careful that it was the first time I was with more than one person without a mask. Yes.
Well, I think it's a very enigmatic ending to the film and very promising for the future. So thanks for this final note. And thanks for having this conversation with me, this reflection on the film. And it was absolutely great to collaborate with you again. So hopefully we will be able to continue that in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks also to Fon. Thanks to Amelie and everybody who I worked with. It was a turning point for me, for sharing my trajectory as an artist. It made me be able to give what I do in another way. And I just want to finish showing the studio that I am now, because it's a studio that is going to be. So this is the beginning, and it goes a long way, and it's full with glass. Look.
It's so big and so much light coming in, indeed.
Yes. It's really huge and really beautiful. And it's only light, only windows with a big terrace. So I had no idea where I was going to be in the beginning of the filming, and I found this place, and it changed also how I'm doing things. So let me show. This is where I am painting. Now, these are the pictures that you saw. There's few silks. Most of the time, I'm here in this corner, and I cook a lot. And so all the furnitures that also were in the last studio are here now, and I'm really happy to have made this transition and to be able to share this here.
Being an insect in development in your cocoon, now now are there in broad daylight. It's a beautiful transformation.
Yeah, and I'm already writing that opera, so all went well, always good.
So then we know what to look forward to.
Yeah,
Exciting.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.